Welcome to Real Leaders with Roshini, the podcast with real talk, real questions, real insight, and we hope, real inspiration. For real. We're here at Capitol Grill in downtown Minneapolis. My guest today is Pete Najarian. He's a financial commentator on CNBC's Fast Money and Fast Money halftime report, but you probably also know him from the world of sport. He played in the NFL and the WFL for 6 years. He was also a star at the University of Minnesota and team captain under coach Lou Holtz. Pretty impressive, Pete. You were inducted into the Minnesota Hall of Fame in 2000. Mm-hmm. I mean, football kind of was your life. Yeah. How do you transition into finance?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I was pre-med. My father was a transplant surgeon. Mother was a surgical nurse, and I always loved that field. And so that was where I thought I was going. But football kind of pulled me away a little bit longer than I had expected in a positive way. It was great. I mean, I loved that experience. But it was really difficult for me to think about being a 30-year-old man and starting all over at the very beginning, really, and going to med school, which would be 4 years, followed by 10 years of surgical residency under my dad. I don't know that I was ready for 14 years of that. So I called up.
But you really did think about it?
I did. Oh, absolutely. I worked in some of the research labs at the University of Minnesota in the off seasons, and actually stood next to my father for some of the transplants that he did, and I didn't really actually help him, but I did hand him stuff when he asked.
I'm sure his
and
patients
everything.
are fine with that. You just kind of observed.
I think they trusted my dad pretty well, but the reality was that I didn't think that I was ready to put in that 14 years that I described. So instead, I went down to Chicago. I went to the Chicago Board Options Exchange. My brother John had been there since '81, and it just clicked. It took a little while, but once it did, I loved it. I was hooked, and it just made me realize that as much as I loved the world of medicine, I thought that this was something that really mimicked the style of football, where in terms of emotionally, there are ups and downs when you're trading, and how do you deal with that? And you're kind of in front of a crowd. The crowd happens to be a little bit different than the crowd at a football stadium, but you are in front of people where you can either embarrass yourself or impress people or whatever. And so, you're always performing, and it was fun.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get into. So you are saying there are analogies from your past life as a football player to then becoming a trader, and then all the things you've done in financial commentary. Take us into the mental game. So you're on the football field. What are some things from that life that you now, your mental game when you're advising as well as watching and trading? Right.
I think the reality is that, the football world is so much more similar than people would ever guess in terms of the financial world. I mean, some of the stuff that I learned through Coach Holtz, you mentioned I played for him, one of the greatest mentors of all time. He really did teach us about discipline. He talked about everything about being prepared. And my whole life is hopefully centered around always being prepared. It's something I stress to both my children as well, along with my wife doing the same thing with them. But, I think the one thing that I love is my kids always look at me and they say, God, Dad, you got home at 2 o'clock in the morning and yet you still got up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym. And I look at them and I say, well, I'm going to the gym no matter what. And that's just part of
the discipline.
I am, the discipline. And you don't skip. It's easy to say, but the reality is if you get yourself there and you get into a routine, routines do really work and discipline. And so I think one of the things that I've leaned on in the financial world has been the disciplines from football to realize when you're wrong, realize when you're beat, and understand how you've got to react to those types of things. So I think sometimes in trading, in the investment world, if it's a bad trade, you just have to have the discipline. And I came up with something called DDA, which is discipline dictates action. And so when I'm talking with people, I oftentimes do bring that up because it's in good and bad. Things are going great in the financial world. Sometimes you have to be disciplined to not be a pig, as they say. And so you have to figure out, how can I do that? How do I implement all of that into the trading world? And it ends up being fairly simple. When I buy a stock or an option, I already know when I'm going to sell.
Really?
Now, if the news story does change dramatically, then I will adjust. But I go in with a strategy every single time when I buy or sell a stock.
The world of Wall Street has also gotten a lot of criticism for the excess investigations, things like this. How do you keep above that fray? Obviously, you're an honest person who has integrity. So I don't really mean that, but it's like continuing to do your work, teaching discipline to your clients, sharing that with your commentary, but you know that's happening around you.
Yeah, well, and it's always been there. It always will be there. We talk about greed all the time in the movie Wall Street, and there was a second one as well. But there are a lot of negatives. There are a lot of people that I see that I don't. I feel like I know who they are, and I just tend to not want to be with those people. So I try to associate myself, and it's another thing. It's another life lesson for my children, and my wife and I talk about it all the time, who you surround yourself with. And I surround myself with people that I trust, that I love, that I know that they have my back and I have theirs. And I don't need to be a part of it. It's funny. I'm out in New York every single week. And we lived out there from 2007 until 2014. And I had a limited number of friends, and that was by design. There's many people in our business that are not as stand-up as you'd like them to be, and they can do their thing, and I'll do mine, but it's going to be separate.
Let's talk about family a little bit, because I know you are a family man, devoted to your wife, Lisa, and something that she has struggled with, a condition that she's had, you've turned into a family cause. Tell Real Leaders with Roshini listeners about that.
Well, my wife went for an extremely long period of time with some ailments, and nobody could figure out what they were. And 16 years later, it turns out that she was diagnosed with Lyme disease. And it was an awful experience for her to go through all of the different factors that she went through. And that was pretty brutal. But on the positive side of things, she finally had an answer to what her question was, which, what's wrong with me? Why do I have this? Why do I have that? And she was diagnosed with everything under the sun. So when we finally got the proper diagnosis that she did have Lyme disease and some of the co-infections that go along with it, at least she had an answer, and at least she could now approach it. How do I do my best to fix it? Because it's something that will be with her for forever, but she can at least help control it. And then we decided there are far too many people out there that go undiagnosed. So that was the impetus behind why we wanted to create TwinCitiesLyme.org, and it's been phenomenal. We've had a great first year and a half of this charity, and we're going to keep on moving on into the future, because we really think this is an untapped area for people. People know so much about all these other different diseases, and they all have great meaning, and everybody is facing different issues. But Lyme disease is one that's sort of off to the side that doesn't get highlighted enough. And we decided we wanted to help put that in the spotlight.
And it's so great that it's become a family affair. Yeah.
Our kids are involved. They both had Lyme disease as well, but they caught it very, very early. It is a family affair. And I have a brother who sits on the board with me, my brother Dave as well. So, it's something that's really meaningful to all of us. And, if we can step in and help even just a few, and hopefully more than a few, but if we can just help a few, boy, you sure feel good about that, because it is a terrible, terrible, not covered enough disease that exists out there.
Pete, you're definitely a national figure, but in your home state of Minnesota, the Najarian name has a lot of clout. I remember when I was a little girl, every time your dad's picture was in the paper, my mom was all excited for whatever reason. She just thought he was so great. And all of the medical and, is it hard to have that over you as you kind of are growing and doing your own thing?
Yeah, it's not hard. I appreciate my dad as much as anybody, and what he did for medicine, what he did for so many people, and the tens of thousands of people in transplants and other surgeries that he did over the years, absolutely amazing. And I always excited. Matter of fact, I was living in California when he came out to celebrate the 10,000th kidney transplant that was occurred in San Francisco. And we were at a baseball game together. He's throwing out the opening pitch. And, I always have just loved what he did. And I'm amazed at what he accomplished for a guy who was literally, his parents came over from Armenia and came to the United States, went from New York and and were eventually in Oakland, and those kids all went to college, got degrees, and my dad just absolutely accelerated. It's a fun thing, but I've never looked at it as, God, how do I ever stand up to him, or how do I stand in his shoes? I don't need to stand in his shoes. His shoes were unbelievable, and I don't want to stand in his shoes. I will do my own thing. But we're all driven, and Dad was a great example of, and Mom are great examples of discipline and getting things, doing things when they need to be done. Don't wait till things need to be happening, but do them when they're in front of you. And and being kind to everybody. My dad knew every janitor up at the University of Minnesota. He probably knew them and their families better than most of the doctors that walked through the hallways there. So that's who he was, and that's who we try to be.
What a great American story that is, and to also be part of that.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of doing your own thing, you've kind of done your own thing with your hair. I think we need to spend a little time on the hair. So you could have decided to go the route of, that clean cut Wall Street look.
Shave
but
it up.
you're like, nope, I'm going to let it go long.
Yeah.
I'm going to have my long goatee. I mean, is there a style concept behind this, Pete?
Oh, this all started with football, and in football, just like wrestling and all sorts of other sports, there is an intimidation factor. And at one point in time, when I still had a full head of hair, I had the long hair, I had the goatee, I had sideburns. I've done it all. And when I got into the trading community, I was just coming out of football. I actually did cut my hair back down. And, like so many other people, you get superstitious over certain things.
Was it kind of like Samson?
Yes.
You're just like, that's my
Absolutely,
strength?
Samson, yes. So my wife has always said to me, she knows when I'm having a good week or month or whatever, based upon asking, do I need a haircut or trim my goatee? So, it's ridiculous. I know it. I think I would look better probably and a little closer to Wall Street if I kind of cleaned up my act, but it is who I am. I loved it on the football field. It was always fun. In the trading community, believe it or not, being a bigger guy and being a former NFL linebacker, standing in a trading pit, you stand out pretty well just on size, but there are other big guys. So how else do you stand out back in the day when you're jumping up and down trying to get in on trades? Well, when you got long hair and you got a dyed white goatee back then, now it's actually natural, but it used to be dyed. You stand out, and that's what I was trying to do back then. And from a TV perspective, they've asked me a few times would I cut my hair, and I tried to explain to them that actually is off bounds. I'll do that whenever I choose to.
Well, you're keeping it real for yourself.
Yeah, well, it's ridiculous, but it's real.
All right, let's have a little fun. We're in Capitol Grill in downtown Minneapolis, a place that knows good food and good drinks. If you were a cocktail or a spirit or a wine, what would Pete Najarian be?
Tequila.
Tequila, like, no hesitation.
Absolutely. It hits you hard. and yet hopefully you still love it. But there are times where it might not be so fun.
Now, do you sip the tequila or these are shooters?
I sip. Okay. I sip. I love my tequila. I think it's great. I'm not advocating to overdo it, but I do love the flavor, and on ice with a lime squeezed into it, that sounds pretty good to me.
All right, so that's the recipe.
Yeah.
What is your recipe for people out there, men and women, who want to have their own path, stay real to themselves, be true? What is your advice to them?
Well, it's something I've done, obviously, and I think that people just have to, I've always used the analogy towards our children of, hey, look, you got to find what you love and then figure out how do you make that a job. And if you can do that, you really have the key to life. If you can find something that you love and yet it's your job and you can make money doing it, that's the unbelievable pieces of the puzzle all coming together. And I think you can do that. It's just a matter of finding those. And, it's perseverance. I see so many people that quit at so many different things. Whether they were traders on the trading floor. I had guys that were drafted when I was playing in the NFL down in Tampa that were high round draft picks that quit during camp and walked away. And I was always amazed by that. But if it's your passion and you're willing to make some of the sacrifices, I think too often people don't understand that there are sacrifices that do have to be made. I mean, there are times where you might want to go out on a Thursday night when I was playing college football for the Gophers and you got a game on Saturday. If you go out Thursday night and you're drinking and having too much, and that affects your game on Saturday, I'll tell you what, I was the first guy to call people out. I think it's why Coach Holtz, despite my long hair and my goatee, which I had back then too, I think he respected the fact that I would call guys out on the team. And
he didn't really need to.
No, he didn't have to. And I would be angry. I'd say, you know what? You dropped that football. Do you think that had anything to do with those extra drinks you had at Stub and Herbs? Or whatever bar it might be.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Well, and that's hard as a young man. I mean, to do that to your teammates too.
Yeah.
Right? That really shows leadership.
Yeah, because you're leaning on other people. I mean, that's the great thing. I mean, I still to this day will tell people that football, I understand the head injuries, the physical body injuries and everything else. But the lifelong things, if you take away the positives of everything you learned playing football, especially at the higher level you get, the more discipline it takes. But it's amazing what you can accomplish. But there are sacrifices, and people don't always see the sacrifices you make. They don't see that you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go work out. When I was playing with Coach Holtz, he had a 6 a.m. practice scheduled in the springtime. It was very smart. Keeps you from going out and partying at night, right? If you got to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. But,
exactly.
All those things, they really do impact your life. And that's how I think you can project forward to being somebody who is willing to make it's the old thing. If you're out there, hooting with the Owls, you still got to soar with the Eagles. You can be out late, but you better be up early and be ready to go.
I have to ask you one quick question before we move on to some fun, because I really do want to talk with you about your wife. What is your take on Coach PJ Fleck? Does he have what it takes to take the Gophers to a national championship?
I actually do. And when I was part of the process of the athletic director search that they had, PJ would have definitely been very high on my list. I'd done a couple of games at Western Michigan. I got to know him. He's an unbelievable recruiter. He's got the enthusiasm. Everybody sees all those outside things. What a lot of people don't see that he does that I think is really incredible, and it's an impact on the lives of those players, and I see it working, is he dives into who they are as people, makes sure they go to class. He teaches guys how to use utensils at dining and all the rest of it, how to treat a date out. I mean, they have all these things that...
Life skills.
Life skills. But those come onto the football field. Again, it's building discipline. It's not making the hit that you can't make that's going to get a 15-yard penalty and cost us too many yards and maybe a score. It's about discipline. And if you look at PJ's teams over the years, he does an amazing job. They're not penalized often. They really do they do whatever it takes to try to win and get yourself in a position to win. And I think PJ, what he's done and some of the recruiting that he's done here is absolutely amazing. So I'm excited for football season, and I'm excited for what PJ could potentially do. There are aspects of him that I know people get annoyed at.
He can definitely be a tequila shot to the heart.
He is a tequila shot guy, but I think his heart's in the right place with the players, and I think that's reflected by what we see with the kids, not only on the field, but what they're doing off the field with the hospitals and everything else at the University of Minnesota. I'm pretty proud of what he's doing.
In the times I've had the pleasure of observing you with your wife, Lisa, you're obviously very in love and supportive of one another. Yeah. How do you keep things sexy, Pete?
Have you seen my wife?
I know she's beautiful, but I mean, again, it's day in and day out. You got kids, you got your businesses you're running,
right?
All these things.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we do have our kids, 25 and 21. They're great children. I love them to death, and I think they're both doing everything that we could have wanted them to do and working hard and all the rest of that. But I tell you, every time I see my wife, it's like the first time. That sounds so cliche and ridiculous, but it's true. And I think every time I see her and she mentions to me, say, "Oh, I don't like the way I looked. I don't like this. I like that." I'm like, you're beautiful. Are you kidding me? So she helps keep it there because she has this great glow all the time. And boy, does she take care of me, because I need taken care of a lot.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast episode. On that very beautiful note, thank you, Pete Najarian.
Yeah,
just a joy to chat with you today.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thanks.
Until next time, keep it real.